Genesis, Exodus, the second book of Moses. And I had just some observations. Been reading along in my daily Bible reading, and I read chapters 21 and 22 together. And it's a passage of Scripture where there's, a verse here, and it deals with this, and it seems to jump to something else, and then something else, and it seems to be these unconnected things. There's, this law, this rule, this judgment, this statute. And you think, how are these connected? And so God is speaking to Moses. Moses is on the Mount Sinai. In chapter 20, the Ten Commandments have been given, and written by the very finger of God on a tablet of stone. And so that shows a permanency to those things. And so it gets to chapter 21, and there's other judgments that God is giving here, and they are tied together not just because of their proximity, but they're tied together in another way. And I'm going to try to explain that as briefly as I can. This has to do with responsibility and consequences, and the overarching thing is this proper conduct that we have with property and people. And so you're traveling through life, and you own things and you deal with people, and God says there's a rule, there's a way to deal with property, there's a way to deal with people. And he said there is a right way to deal with people, and there's a wrong way to deal with people. There's a right way to deal with property or things that you own, and there's an improper or wrong way to deal with those things. And so this is the kind of the overarching theme of chapter 21 and 22, and it goes on into chapter 23, but we're not going to deal with that. But let's read the first 6 verses or so here of Exodus 21. It says, "Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. If thou buy an Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. If he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master have given him a wife, and she have borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. And if the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go free, then his master shall bring him unto the judges, and he shall also bring him to the door or unto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever." And so I may deal with this next week, this thing of servanthood or slavery, and you find that in the Bible. The Bible does not endorse slavery in the way that you think of slavery today. When it talks about here in verse number 2 about buying a servant, it's very different than what we would think of slavery in a modern context. So, but verse number 1, it says, "Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them." God is speaking to Moses, and he's saying, this is what I want you to put in front of them. If you were to come to our house for dinner, we're going to set things on the table. There are going to be things, or they're going to be in the kitchen. They'll arranged in the kitchen maybe. A lot of the guys have eaten at our house, and sometimes we'll have things in the kitchen. I said, it's all set out. Make yourself at home, And so this is in the same way. Moses is going to set things out for these people to get a hold of. He said, I'm going to set this before them, put this in front of them, help them to see this, help them to understand this. And so he's dealing here with these different things throughout these 2 chapters. And so one of the first things that he's trying to tell us here is that God establishes the fact that that you have rights. There are certain rights that you have. When it talks about here that someone would buy a Hebrew servant, in our culture, if you go back to the beginning of this country, you got people that were indentured servants. That means that they would sell part of their life, say, I'm going to come work for you in your shop. And it may be a silversmith, it may be somebody that is a carpenter, maybe somebody that's a cobbler, and said, I'll come work for you. I'll agree to work for you a certain length of time. There's a contract that is drawn up, and I'll work for you, and you're going to provide everything I need to do the trade. You're going to teach me the job. You're going to teach me how to do this. You're going to teach me a skill. And so I've heard Jimbo talk about this quite a bit. I know he's involved in teaching a trade. in some ways it's the same way, but you're living probably in somebody's house. They're providing your food, providing your clothes, and you're providing them a service. You're giving them your labor. You're helping to labor. And so, but this servant, this person that has sowed themselves into this indentured situation, they have rights too. It's not just the master that has rights. Servants were to be treated. You find this all through the Bible. The Bible recognizes that there were many, many cultures that had servanthood or slavery, that they were to be treated with respect and dignity. And so you say, why didn't the Bible do this and this? The Bible is setting, God is setting in this, he's taking slavery apart. He's set things in motion that's going to dismantle it over the course of time. And so it's not the way we look at it today so much. And so this would be somebody to say, look, I need some help. I don't have a skill. I don't have a job. And you have a skill. You have a business. And I'm willing to live in your house or live in the place that you provide. And you show me this. And so for 6 years, if you're a Hebrew, for 6 years you would go into this contract. The 7th year, you would go free. And so God is establishing that each person has a certain level of rights. You're to be respected. You're to have dignity. Every one of us ought to be on an equal footing. If you'd say, if we're living in a fair society, whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be treated the same thing. You're a human being. And that's why we ought to treat people with respect and dignity, because they bear the image of their Maker. We are made in the image of God. And because of that, we don't have rights. It's not a government-given thing. Rights are a God-given thing. If it was a government-given thing to have a certain right, the government could take it away. But if it is a God-given right, respect, dignity, equal footing, only God could take it away. And so he's letting us know that, hey, you may be somebody that doesn't have much money or power or much wealth, anything like that. He said, but, I recognize you're a person. You're a person. And so not only is there rights that God's establishing here, but he's also he establishes the fact that there are responsibilities that you ought to honor. On the other side of this, he said, if the servant, he's entered into a relationship, he's signed or shook his hand, however it was established in that day. There would be some kind of understanding between the two. And so the person steps in, you're going to treat me right, you're going to treat me with respect, yes. And so there is a responsibility on the other side of that. Each of us have rights, but each of us have responsibilities, liabilities, that I'm going to shoulder this load, that I have, okay, let's say the master, what is he to do for this servant? Well, first of all, he's going to pay him. He's going to give him a wage. And some of that wage may be a place to live, food to eat, it may be housing, clothing, those kinds of things. That may be part of the wage. And this the servant has a responsibility also to serve. Each person has a responsibility. And they have the responsibility, both of them, the responsibility to honor the agreement. And if the one person didn't honor the agreement, there's legal action you could take. You could go to the judges. And so Moses was, at one point, he was judging all of Israel. His father-in-law saw him sitting from the morning to the evening, and his father-in-law named Jethro comes to him and says, you're taking a lot on you. He said, you need to get some other people to help you judge and handle some lesser things. And so these are things that would be given to the judges, and they're able to decide who has done what. Some years ago, we drew up a contract. We had a home in Deputy, Indiana, and we were selling the house on contract. We were to provide the house, and we did that. And the people that were going to live there, they were to pay the the fee every month, and basically I was just trying to stay afloat. You know, I was taking the money that I was getting on the house rental or the house sale and putting it back in the mortgage. And at some point, they were going to roll that in and get the loan themselves. And I knew we were in trouble. The first payment, when they sent me a check, and the check bounced, and I called the bank, and they said that this account is closed, and the responsibility that they had, they did not honor that. It was 10 months of a nightmare, and they never honored anything. I went back to the lawyer that drew up the contract. He said, Mr. Jones, there's really nothing you can do about this. They don't have any money. And I figured that out. And so he wasn't much help to me in all that. But each of us have a responsibility, things that we owe to someone else. If you own something, you have a responsibility towards that. If you have an animal, you have a responsibility towards that. If you have children, you have a responsibility to that. If you have parents, there's a responsibility you have for them. And so rights and responsibilities. You have rights, you have responsibilities. And so everybody wants to talk about their rights, but nobody wants to talk about their responsibilities. Sometimes responsibilities are a heavy load to carry. Sometimes the responsibility is a lot on us. And so we have to be very careful and very thoughtful about the things that we own and we possess and the relationships we have with other people. In all this, in chapter 21 and 22, God is telling us some things. He says that there is an accounting if you deprive somebody of their rights, or if you don't step up and handle your responsibilities, there is an accounting of what you do with your rights and with your responsibilities. Sometimes people take their right and they misuse that. Sometimes people have responsibilities and they abuse that. He says in verse number 6, he says, then his master shall bring him unto the judges. And so there are people in this world. There is civil authority. There is, let's say, I don't know, who wants to go into okay, Zoe and I, we make agreement. She's going to sell me, what do you want to sell me? A TV. She's going to sell me a TV. She says, this TV works, Pastor. This is the best TV you ever going to own. It's 70 inches, and it's a color. You can hook it up to anything, and, man, you could put a game console on this, and I take that thing home. I've trusted her. I get it home. I plug it in. It don't work. I'm thinking, she's got over on me. How much money did I give you? $200. I gave her $200, and I'm like, I'm out. And so I said, Zoe, I want my money back. This thing don't work. She said, never happening. I mean, she gets pretty hardcore. And so I could take her to this, I could try to sue her for the $200. But we be brethren. We're in the family of God. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to let it go. And she wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that to me anyway. Well, you should have seen her eyes. I don't know. Don't buy a TV from this little girl. And so we recognize there are avenues in this world to get redress, to file a grievance. There's things that work for those kinds of things. But there's a human instrumentality if the law's broken and that deal with things. Look in verse number 12. This accounting that takes place. It says, he that smiteth a man so that he die shall be surely put to death. He said, you kill someone, you're going to forfeit your life. It says that if a man lie not in wait, but God deliver him into his hand, then I will point thee a place whither he shall flee. If you didn't do it on purpose, there's a way out there. It said, but if a man come presumptuously upon his neighbor to slay him with guile, thou shalt take him from mine altar that he may die. He that smiteth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He that stealeth a man, the kidnappers, and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. And he that curseth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. And so there are these things that God's saying. He said, these seem to be very unconnected things, but he's saying, I'm trying to teach you that there are rights that you have, but there's also responsibilities, and there are also consequences to this. There is an accounting in this world. If you do this in a right situation, the law will deal with this and will deal with you. But there's also this, look in chapter 22, verse number 22. It says, ye shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If thou afflict them in any wise, and they cry out at all unto me, I will surely hear their cry. And my wrath shall wax hot, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. And God says, so there is an accounting for your rights and responsibilities in this world, and there is a civil law. There are judges in this world that are going to take care of things. But he says also this. He said, I want you to know this. That may not always work in this world. We've seen things that are not fair. We've seen things where justice does not seem to be carried out. We've seen things, they say, hey, they got off. We know they did that. They got away with it. Every time I see a big crowd of people that bust into a store with bags and they're just putting stuff in this, and they run out, it's some kind of mass flash mob of looters. Man, that makes me crazy. I just want to go crazy about that. I said, well, where's the justice? None of those people are ever going to get caught. God tells us, particularly in this sense, dealing with this, of widows and fatherless, he said, I want you to know, I'm hearing their cry. They may get away with it in this world, he said, but I'm going to deal with this too. I also see this. And so, deal with your rights responsibly. Take care of the things that you owe other people, for your property, for animals. Look here in verse number 15. I'm sorry, back in chapter 21. So God establishes the fact that there are rights that you have, responsibilities that you are to honor, that there is an accounting for what you do with your rights and your responsibility. And then, secondly, God establishes that there are things that are wrong if we do them. In verse 15, it says, he that smiteth his father or his mother shall be surely put to death. He that stealeth, in verse 16. And then verse 17, he that curseth his father and mother. He said, these things, God is establishing this. God is saying, it is wrong to smite. It is wrong to steal. It is wrong to curse. God is putting the label on it. You ever remember those little, I don't know what they were called, but they had a little dial on it years ago. They had a little dial on it, the alphabet, and they had numbers on it, and then you pull the trigger, and it would punch a little, the alphabet on that, and it was a label maker. They have electronic label makers today. And so you could go through the house, label this light switch, you can label this drawer, you can label this file. All these things get labeled. And God is coming through here in chapter 21 and chapter 22, and he's labeling things. He's saying, this is what's wrong. This is wrong. This would be a sin of commission. You've done this. You smited somebody. Bam, hit, violence. You stole someone. You're a kidnapper. You're a man-stealer. You took something that did not belong to you. You cursed your father and mother. You were disrespectful to authority. No doubt there's probably more that went with that. And so there are sins of commission, action. You thought about it and you did it. You thought about it and you conceived a plan. And sometimes we send people to prison and they become better criminals because they put their heads together and they come up with better ways to steal, better ways to rob, better ways to get over on people. And God says, hey, that is wrong. It's wrong to do that. It is a sin. There is punishment for that in this life and the life to come. But there's also this, God establishes this, that there are certain things that are wrong if you don't do them. Those are sins of omission. Let me give you one. Chapter 21, verse 28. Say, I didn't do anything. Well, by not doing something, you were wrong. verse number 28 says, if an ox gore a man. Ox, big animal, beast of burden, has horns on it. If it gores, takes that horn and sticks somebody, it'd be a very violent act. If an ox gore a man or a woman, that they die, then the ox shall surely be stoned, and his flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be quit. So you have an ox, and just out of the blue, the ox gets violent, goes on a rampage. You couldn't stop it. You didn't know it. Never had acted like this before. And sometimes you see where a dog mauls somebody. Terrible thing. They'll take that animal. You try to keep the animal pinned up, but the animal got away. And they'll take the animal, and oftentimes they'll destroy that animal. That's what God says here. But it goes into this. Look at verse number 29. It says, but if the ox were wont to push with his horn in the past. That was his tendency. He's done this before. He's been kind of, he'd get agitated around people. And he says, and if it had been testified to his owner, hey, I've been watching that ox you got. He's not a good ox. He's a bad ox. He's going to cause somebody some harm. And I'm just telling you today, you better do something about that. And it says, and he had not kept him in. So he didn't fence him in. He didn't make it right. He didn't try to keep him pinned up. He just let the ox do whatever he was going to do. And he says, in verse number 29, but that he had killed a man or woman. The ox shall be stoned, and his owner also shall be put to death. And so you own something, and you don't do something. He didn't pin him up. He didn't take care of it. He didn't put him away. He didn't tie him like he ought to. He didn't fence him in. He didn't do something, and he's just as wrong as if he did something by commission. God says you can do some things that would be wrong by your actions, but some things would be wrong because you didn't do it. Can you think of something that you could do today or not do today, and would be maybe wrong by not doing something? It's very quiet on the recording right now. Okay, I think that's a good thing. It's say you have guns in the house, you have loaded guns, and nothing wrong with that, but you're not safe with it. You have little children, and you leave it lying out. You're reckless about it. What did you do? I didn't do anything. Right, you didn't put it up. You didn't do what you should have done. Let's say you knew something was poisonous, or that some kind of food would make someone sick. You say, that's spoiled, that's bad, and I left it out. I didn't warn somebody. That would be a sin of omission. You didn't do anything per se, but you didn't do what you should have done. And God said, that's wrong also. And you have a responsibility to do something about it. Your responsibility to do right, and your responsibility is to step up and take care of things. Let me give you another example of this. In verse number 33. It says, if a man shall open a pit. Why would you have a pit in the first place? There's lots of reasons. If anybody have a basement at your house? Nobody? Wow, I got a half basement. Some years ago, I got an old house. What year was that built? I don't know when it was built. In that neighborhood, they come in, we're going to build a house here. And they dug a hole in the ground, that would be a pit. And we're going to come back tomorrow and do whatever we're going to do with the pit and begin to build a foundation and build a house over it. But tonight we've got a pit that's uncovered. Hey, we better put up maybe some rope, maybe. Maybe we ought to put a sign up that, hey, look out, there's a pit here. Years ago, I got in all kinds of trouble at the state park where I lived next to. My brother and I, he was always getting me in trouble, and we were over playing in a construction site. We were little big guys. He was probably in the 4th grade, I was in the 6th grade, and we were playing in this construction site and the park ranger comes by, and he takes out his little notepad. I hate it when they take out their notepad. He writes down, what's your name? And your name? Jeff Jones. And where do you live, Jeff? Right over here. Well, let's go talk to your mother. And so, shouldn't play in a zone. They probably had signs there that said we shouldn't play there. And so, you got a pit that's open in the ground. Let's see what verse 33. It says, and if a man shall open a pit, and if a man shall dig a pit, and not cover it, and an ox or an ass fall therein, the owner of the pit shall make it good, and give money unto the owner of them, and the dead beast shall be his. What did he do? He didn't do something. He didn't cover it up. He didn't make it safe. He didn't go the extra mile. He didn't take care of his responsibility. What should he have done? He should have covered the pit. He should have made sure that something couldn't fall in it. And so there are sins of commission, and there's sins of commission and omission. I get them straight here. And so God says you have a responsibility in this life. You have rights. I like rights. I like to have my right. Free speech, pursue happiness, all the things that go with all the rights that I have. But I also have responsibilities. I've got to take care of what I have. I've got a car. I've got a house. I own some property. If I had something dangerous there, the children in the neighborhood would, let's say I've got a deep freeze in my basement that quit, and I need to get it out of there sometime. And this is a true thing. Got a deep freeze, and I take that deep freeze and I set it by the road, and it's still got the lid on it. And this happens sometime, where a kid may open that and crawl in and not be able to get out. You say, I didn't intend for that to happen. I didn't mean for a child to get in that. But I have a responsibility to make sure that that cannot happen. You got to go the extra mile. You got to carry it all the way through. And so God says, I recognize that. He said, if you have a pit, something that you should have taken care, and you didn't take care of it, and something falls in it, somebody's beast of burden, he said, you got to make that right. You got to pay that guy back. You have a responsibility to him. Let me give you this last thought real quick. It is God's decree that makes something right or wrong. God tells us if it's right. God tells us what is wrong. It is very interesting to me that much of our law is based in these things. If you were to go to the Supreme Court, you go to places, there are pictures of Moses and the Ten Commandments. There are places they've tried to erase that, but much of what we believe is right in society is based on God's law here. This is how you handle things. So God is trying to teach us how to have a civil society. And so God wants to place us on an equal footing. And so I've got to think about this. How am I going to handle my rights and my responsibilities? And so with each of those things, when I exercise my rights, there are consequences. And as a Christian, there's sometimes, Paul talks about this in the New Testament, that I would forego my rights if it would infringe on somebody else's rights. There's also this, as I exercise my responsibilities or not exercise my responsibilities, there's also consequences with that. And I've got to learn to live with the consequences of when I do right and wrong. You know, they say if you were to go to prison, everybody says they're innocent in prison. I didn't do a thing. Well, the court convicted you of that, this and that. Everybody thinks they're innocent, But most people just don't want to own up to the responsibility that they have for what they did. And so I think we ought to, that's what confession is with God. It is owning what you did. God, I did this. I did wrong, and Lord, I see that I did wrong. I own that. I'm agreeing with you that I did wrong. I shouldn't have done that. I tell you, it's a good way to live as a Christian, to own own the responsibility of those things and to do right. So anyway, I'm done. Unless there's any question, comment. All good? Don't buy a TV from this little girl. Maybe lemonade. I'll buy lemonade from you, maybe, but not a TV. Yeah.
Pastor, I forgot to mention it, but my niece came home from the hospital last Saturday, and I talked to her first time she talked to anybody in months,
Mm-hmm.
and she said she was doing okay. She was weak,
Mm-hmm.
but she was supposed to go to Tuesday or Monday, one day this week, and get those 2 tests taken on her heart.
Mm-hmm.
And she's living with her son as of right now. They took her couch there to make it feel more like home.
Mm-hmm.
But she's still not talking a lot. She's still very depressed now.
Okay.
So she really needs prayer.
And what's her name again?
Sue.
Sue.